Chapter 33, The Bondum of Sacrificem. The temple of the bestial mother was silent, save for the distant echoes of the ocean seeping through the stone walls. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of ancient power pressing down upon them. Before them lay the chains that bound the bestial mother, ancient and immovable, forged to contain the wild, destructive force of the goddess who lay dormant beneath the ocean. The weaver stood at the centre of the group, her presence commanding yet gentle, like the song of fate itself. She spoke softly, yet her words cut through the silence like a blade. The time has come. One must touch the chains. Only through sacrifice will the bond be formed. Only through sacrifice will you gain the strength to imprison the evil that resides within you, Elowen. Elowen felt her heart twist in her chest. The weaver's words echoed like a death knell, but she understood. This moment had been inevitable. The chains that bound the bestial mother were their only hope, the only means to bind the evil god that tormented her soul. Yet they would need a sacrifice, and it would come from one of them. Selene, who had been standing quietly by Elowen's side, moved forward without hesitation. Her resolve was unshakable. She had known this day would come long before they set foot in the temple, long before the first battle against the evil god that plagued Elowen's mind. It had been after that fight, the day when she saw the devastation the god could bring, that she had made her decision. She would be the one to offer herself. The others, though hesitant, did not stop her. There was no denying her, no changing the path she had chosen. They understood. They had seen her determination, her strength, and the weight of her decision. Selene reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the chains. The ancient metal glowed faintly, responding to her touch as though recognizing the sacrifice she was about to make. When her fingers finally brushed against the chains, a surge of energy coursed through her, and the room was filled with a blinding light. Her body began to glow, her form radiant with the pure energy of the chain's power. She spoke softly, her voice steady and filled with affection, though there was a faint sadness in her eyes as she looked toward Elowen and Lyra. "Elowen," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "Lyra, I want you to know that I do not regret this. You both have brought meaning to my life. You have given me purpose. I believe in you, in all of you. I know that with this sacrifice, the chains of fate will bind the god inside you, and I believe you will both be free." Her words were a final encouragement, a blessing for the future. But even as she spoke, her body began to disintegrate, the energy of the chains eating away at her flesh. Her arm began to wither, turning to ash as her essence was consumed by the chain's power. She fought against the inevitable, her eyes locked onto Elowen's, her love for her burning brightly in her final moments. But just as the light of her form began to dim, a hand reached out from behind her. Lyra, with a desperate cry, stepped forward, her face filled with sorrow and determination. She knew what Selene was doing, and she knew the price of this sacrifice. Her heart was heavy with love for her companion, but also with the realization that she could not let her die alone. Without a second thought, Lyra pressed her hand to the chain beside Selene's, her elvish heritage strong within her. The moment her fingers touched the chain, she felt a surge of power, but also the undeniable weight of a life exchanged. Her long, graceful fingers, which had so often wielded magic, were now consumed by the same energy that devoured Selene. "Weaver," Lyra whispered, her voice pleading, "take my life, take my long years, my elvish blood. Let Selene live. She cannot die. Not now. Not like this." The weaver's gaze was solemn, unreadable. She stared at Lyra for a long moment as though measuring the very soul of the elf. Then she nodded. "Very well, Lyra. You will forsake your long life, your heritage, your connection to the elves. In exchange, Selene shall live." The air crackled as the weaver's words settled, and the energy of the chain seemed to pulse in response. The moment Lyra's plea was accepted, the light surrounding Selene flared brighter, then began to settle. The disintegration of her form slowed, and the glow that surrounded her dimmed, though the remnants of her power still flickered in the air. But the damage had already been done. Selene's left arm was gone, completely consumed by the chain. At the same moment, Lyra's right arm began to disintegrate, as though the very essence of her had been given away in exchange. Her elvish beauty, once unmarked by time, began to fade, and her skin grew pale as though the life force that had once flowed so freely through her veins was now drained away. The transformation was painful, but Lyra held strong, her gaze fixed on Selene, her love for the warrior more than enough to bear the cost of what she had given up. Selene, her body still radiating with a soft golden glow, stumbled back, her face contorted in agony from the loss of her arm. But she was alive, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe freely. Her gaze found Lyra, and she smiled through the pain, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. "Lyra," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you've given everything for me." Lyra, her own breath shallow and laboured, offered a faint smile in return. "We're in this together, Selene. Always." As the two women locked eyes, the chains that had bound the bestial mother seemed to stir. A chain was loose now, a chain that had been broken by their sacrifice. And in that moment, Elowen felt the change within her. The god inside her stirred, but the bond that had tethered him to her mind was weakening. The weaver, standing silently nearby, watched them both with a mixture of approval and sorrow. Her voice, though quiet, carried the weight of fate itself. "The chains have been undone. The evil god's grip on you, Elowen, weakens. But remember this, the price of freedom is steep. The path you now walk is one of great cost. You will never be the same. None of you will." The temple, once filled with an oppressive silence, now hummed with a subtle energy. The bestial mother, though still sleeping, seemed to respond to the change, her immense form stirring in the deep. But for now, the immediate threat, the god that had plagued Elowen, was on the verge of being bound, and for that the price had been paid. But the journey was far from over. Velric was the first to act, immediately inspecting Selene and Lyra. Though weakened, they were alive. The arcane traces of the ritual still lingered around them, but aside from the missing limbs, there were no signs of further deterioration. "The damage is permanent," he finally said, his voice heavy with thought. "But nothing else seems to have changed. No corruption, no lingering curses. Your sacrifices were accepted by the chains." Selene flexed her remaining hand, then looked at Lyra. A small, bittersweet smile crossed her lips. "Could have been worse," she said with forced humour. Lyra, always more reserved, simply nodded. "We did what we had to." The temple walls trembled as the final echoes of the ritual faded into the depths of the ocean. The sacred energy that had once bound the bestial mother still pulsed faintly in the air, but its strength had shifted. The sacrifice had been made. A chain was forged, and with it a fate had been rewritten. Elowen took a deep breath, her heart still unsteady from what had transpired. Selene and Lyra stood beside her, their missing limbs a stark reminder of the price they had paid. Yet they remained standing, together, unbroken. The weaver turned to them with a final nod. "Your task here is done. It is time to leave these depths before the ocean claims you." With a wave of her hand, the temple's walls shimmered, and a passage formed back to the entrance. They hurried through, stepping onto the ancient platforms that led them back to the submarine, a relic of the goddess of evolution, still waiting, untouched by time. The ascent from the deep. The submarine's interior was silent as the group took their places once more. Valric, the Archmage, studied the vessel's controls, his brow furrowed with deep thought. "This machine is a marvel," he murmured, running his fingers over the smooth, almost organic panels. The goddess of evolution created this to observe the seals of the old world, yet it still functions as if it were built yesterday. The knowledge of the ancients truly surpasses even our greatest works. As the submarine hummed to life, the walls became transparent, revealing the dark, endless abyss outside. The waters stirred around them, illuminated only by bioluminescent creatures drifting in the void. The submarine rose steadily, passing through the shifting blues and greens of the ocean layers. Strange ruins, remnants of an age before history, appeared in the distance, their massive, broken forms speaking of a war long lost to time. Velric observed them carefully, murmuring theories under his breath, but none had time to linger on the past. As they neared the surface, the weight of the ocean lessened. The pressure faded, and finally, with a surge of energy, the submarine broke through the waves, greeted by the golden glow of Ordnum's floating spires.
"Return to Ordnum!"
The docking platform awaited them, a team of Ordnum's guardians standing ready. As the hatch opened, the crisp sea air filled their lungs, washing away the dampness of the deep. Veilric sighed. "We should leave soon. The longer we stay in this city, the more eyes will be upon us. The House of Doors is waiting." And so, without further delay, they left the docks of Ordinum, making their way toward the passage that led them back to their own domain. Through the House of Doors. The House of Doors stood at the edge of reality, its corridors shifting with every step they took. The great, endless halls of ever-changing portals whispered in the voices of forgotten realms, beckoning travellers to unknown destinations. But they did not hesitate. They knew the way home. As they walked, the echoes of their footsteps blended with the murmurs of the house. The doors around them flickered between worlds, some leading to lands of golden meadows, others to starless voids where only shadows moved. But they ignored these distractions, stepping toward the portal they knew well. Veilric placed his hand on the archway, and the sigils carved into the stone pulsed with recognition. A familiar warmth enveloped them as they stepped through, and in an instant, the House of Doors faded behind them.
"Return to Elysium!"
They emerged into the heart of their keep in Elysium. The golden sky stretched above them, untouched by time or war. The grand halls stood strong, their banners swaying gently in the breeze of this eternal kingdom. Elowyn exhaled slowly. They were home. The journey had taken its toll. Wounds had been inflicted, some physical, others deeper, unseen. Yet they had succeeded. The heavenly chain was forged, and soon the evil god within her would be bound. Elowyn, Selene, Lyra and Veilric stepped into the keep, the weight of their journey settling over them like a heavy cloak. Though they had returned to the safety of Elysium, there was no celebration, no moment to rest. Their task was not yet complete. The chain had been forged, but without its binding it was nothing more than an artifact. Veilric was the first to break the silence. "The chain exists, but it is still powerless. If we do not bind it soon, the entity within Elowyn may regain control, and all of this will have been for nothing." Elowyn nodded, pressing a hand to her temple. The evil god within her had been silent since they left the temple's depths, but she could feel its presence shifting, watching, waiting. "There is only one person who can do what we need," Selene said, her voice quiet but firm. "Saintis Akintempus." Lyra frowned. "She will not act against the Church's will. If word spreads that she aided us, the entire religious order may turn against her, and us." "Then we go unseen," Elowyn said. "No one must know." Veilric sighed. "Sneaking into the great temple at night to request a secret ritual from the Saintis? We are truly running out of acceptable options." "Did we ever have acceptable options?" Selene muttered. Elowyn offered a small, tired smile. "Then let's do what we must." The night fell upon Elysium, casting long shadows over the city's spires. The streets were quiet, lit only by the soft glow of enchanted lanterns. The grand temples of the city stood tall against the moonlit sky, their towering forms exuding an air of serenity and power. Moving unseen was no easy task, even for those accustomed to secrecy. The great temple of the Divine Order was one of the most guarded places in Elysium, watched over by both mortal sentinels and celestial spirits. Cloaked in dark robes, the four made their way through the back streets, avoiding the main roads. Lyra led the way, her elven grace allowing her to move in near silence. Selene followed close behind, her presence steady despite her missing arm. Veilric's magic blurred their forms, a precaution against unwanted eyes. As they neared the temple, the grand marble steps loomed before them, leading up to the sacred halls where the Saintis resided. White banners, embroidered with golden threads, fluttered in the wind. Statues of past saints stood in solemn vigil along the path, their carved eyes seeming to watch their every move. Veilric whispered an incantation, and the air around them shimmered, bending the light just enough to mask their presence. They moved swiftly, slipping through the entrance and into the dimly lit corridors beyond. The temple was silent, save for the faint murmurs of distant prayers. The scent of incense filled the air, mingling with the ever-present aura of divine magic. Selene took the lead, her steps certain as she guided them deeper into the temple's heart. She knew the way, she had been here before. At last, they reached the chamber of the Saintess. A single guardian stood before the grand double doors, clad in ceremonial armor, his gaze unwavering. Veilric raised a hand, whispering a spell. The guard's eyes fluttered, his body stiffening for a brief moment before he exhaled softly, his stance relaxing. "He will not remember we passed," Veilric murmured. Elowyn stepped forward and knocked 3 slow, deliberate taps. A moment of silence passed. Then the doors creaked open, revealing the solemn figure within.
An audience with the Saintess?
Saintess Achinitempus stood before them, her golden robes catching the flickering candlelight. Her expression was calm, though her deep green eyes held an understanding that pierced through the secrecy of their arrival. "I have been expecting you," she said simply. Elowyn exchanged a glance with Veilric, but no words were needed. The Saintess, touched by divine sight, had foreseen their arrival. "Come inside. We must not waste time." They stepped into the chamber, and the doors closed behind them with a heavy thud. The room was simple yet elegant, white marble floors, golden-lit candles, and a central altar where prayers had been whispered for centuries. A single, circular window at the far end allowed moonlight to spill in, casting a glow upon the Saintess as she turned to face them fully. "You have forged the chain," Ikin said, her gaze landing on Elowyn, "but it remains powerless unless it is bound to your soul." Elowyn inhaled deeply. "I understand. To do so, you must face the evil within you directly. The ritual requires that you sleep in its presence, allowing the chain to take hold while your mind drifts between the waking and the dream. Only then will it be sealed away." A cold sensation crawled up Elowyn's spine. The thought of willingly stepping into her own nightmares, knowing what awaited her, was enough to make her hesitate. But she had come too far to turn away now. "I will do it," she said, her voice steady. The Saintess nodded. "Then we begin immediately." Selene and Lyra stepped closer, a silent promise of support in their presence. Veilric watched with quiet intensity, his mind already calculating the protections he would weave. Saintess Akin extended her hands, and the chains, the very ones Selene and Lyra had forged with their sacrifice, materialized in the air before them, glowing with a pale, silvery light. "Lie down upon the altar," she instructed. "Close your eyes. The moment you drift into sleep, the battle will begin." Elowyn did as she was told, her heart pounding in her chest. As the Saintess began to chant, the air grew heavy with divine energy. The chains coiled around her wrists and ankles, their touch cold as ice. The last thing she heard before the darkness took her was Lyra's voice, whispering, "We will bring you back, Elowyn, no matter what it takes." And then she fell into the abyss. The descent into the nightmare. As Elowyn's consciousness faded, she was swallowed by darkness, an abyss colder than the ocean's depths. The weight of the chains around her body felt heavier, as if dragging her down through unseen currents. Then a whisper. "Did you think binding me would be so simple?" The voice slithered into her mind, deeper than thought, wrapping around her like a noose. It was the same voice that had tormented her since she had become its vessel, but now it was different, stronger, desperate. The darkness shifted, forming a landscape of nightmares. A ruined battlefield stretched before her, the remains of a kingdom she recognized, her own. Fires burned in the distance, black smoke choking the sky. The ground beneath her feet was soaked in blood, reflecting a distorted image of herself, but it wasn't her. The figure in the reflection stood taller, her armor blackened, her eyes burning gold with divine wrath. Power radiated from her like a storm barely contained, the evil god. He had taken her form, her voice, her strength, twisting them into something monstrous. "This is what you will become, Elowyn." The reflection smirked, stepping forward, the blood at her feet rippling. "This is what you were always meant to be." A surge of pain lashed through her mind. Chains, both real and imagined, tightened around her limbs, searing into her skin. The evil god was resisting, trying to break free before the ritual could take hold. She fell to her knees, gasping for breath, but she refused to look away. "You will not win," she spat. The reflection only laughed, the battlefield around them twisting further. Shadows rose, taking the form of those she had failed, her people, her soldiers, those who had died in the war. "Then fight me, Elowyn, if you can." Reality, holding the line. Outside the dream, the chamber trembled. Elowyn's body writhed upon the altar, her breathing erratic. The chains binding her in the physical world shuddered, their glow flickering as if uncertain of their own strength. Saintess Akin stood firm at the altar, her hands hovering over Elowin's chest, channeling divine energy through the chains. Her voice was unwavering as she chanted the ancient rites, but beads of sweat formed on her brow. "She's resisting too much," the saintess murmured. Veilric, standing beside her, extended his staff. Runes flared to life in the air around them, strengthening the protective circle surrounding Elowin. "It's not her, it's the evil god," he corrected. "It knows this is its last chance to break her." Selene and Lyra knelt at Elowin's sides, each gripping one of her hands. Lyra, despite her own pain from the recent sacrifice, tightened her hold. "She's strong, she won't lose." But Selene's expression was grim. She could feel it. Elowin's body was cold, her breath slowing. "We need to do more. She's slipping away." The saintess clenched her jaw, golden magic weaving into the air like threads of fate. "There is a way to strengthen her hold, but it will require something from you two as well." Lyra and Selene exchanged a look. "Whatever it takes," Lyra said. The saintess didn't hesitate. Raising her hands, she traced a sigil in the air before pressing her palms against their foreheads. "Lend her your light. Give her a tether to hold on to." Selene's vision blurred as warmth spread from the touch. Memories surfaced of Elowin standing beside her in battle, of the princess whispering reassurances in their darkest moments. Lyra too felt something shift, a deep pull within her, drawing forth every moment she had ever fought for Elowin, for the future they both wanted. Golden threads of energy flowed from their hands into Elowin's body.
The Nightmare War!
In the dream, Elowin staggered back as the evil god advanced, its presence suffocating, the battlefield twisted, becoming an endless void where her worst fears played out. But then, something changed. A thread of light broke through the darkness, and, with it, a voice. "Elowin," she turned, and for a brief moment she saw them, Selene and Lyra. Not as illusions, not as shadows, but as themselves. Their hands reached out, golden energy tethering her to reality. She grasped it, the battlefield shuddered, the evil god's smirk faltered. No, the voice, once taunting, was now furious. Elowin gritted her teeth, pulling the golden light closer to herself. The chains, both in the nightmare and in reality, tightened, burning through the god's presence. "This ends now." Summoning every ounce of strength left within her, she thrust her hand forward. The chains coiled around the evil god, its form writhing, screaming. "You think you can bind me?" "I don't think," Elowin growled. "I know." The golden light intensified, wrapping around her body like armor. With one final push, she drove the chains deeper, locking them into place. The void trembled, the battlefield crumbling. The evil god's final scream echoed into nothingness. Then, silence.
The Awakening.
Elowin gasped awake. Her body jerked on the altar, the last remnants of divine energy crackling around her. The chains that had bound her body in reality had stopped flickering. They now pulsed with steady, contained power. Selene and Lyra slumped against the altar, drained but alive. Veilric exhaled deeply, lowering his staff. Saintess Akin watched closely, her expression unreadable. "It is done," she murmured. "The chains are bound." Elowin sat up slowly, her body aching as if she had just fought an entire war. In a way, she had. But something was different. The whisper in her mind, the constant presence of the evil god was gone. For the first time in what felt like eternity, she was alone in her thoughts. Selene's hand found hers. "You did it." Lyra's tired smile was small but sincere. "You're finally free." Elowin looked down at the chains wrapped around her wrists, their glow faint but ever present. They were a reminder of what she had done and what she had survived. She wasn't free. Not entirely, but she had won. And that was enough.
And you don't on.
The quiet of the chamber stretched on for a moment before the saintess spoke again, her voice filled with a soft, contemplative reverence. "You have defeated the evil god within you, Elowin, but be mindful. The chains are not only a prison for what you overcame, they are also a constant reminder of the battle still ahead." Elowin nodded, her gaze steady as she looked at the chains. Their power was contained, but it would always be with her. A reminder of the darkness she had once harboured and the strength she had found to resist it. "We all have battles to face," Veilric said quietly, his tone reflective, "and we can only face them together." Selene and Lyra smiled at him, nodding in agreement. Elowyn's heart swelled with gratitude for her companions. They had been with her through the darkest of times, and they would be there as she continued forward, carrying the weight of what she had done and the promise of what they still could achieve. The Saintess turned toward the window, the moonlight casting a gentle glow over her features. "You are free from the god's influence, but your journey is far from over. The world still needs saving, and the fates of many depend on the choices you make from here on." Elowyn stood, her body still heavy from the toll of the ritual, but her spirit stronger than ever. She looked at her friends, feeling the warmth of their support. "Then let us face the next challenge," she said, her voice firm. The chains on her wrists glowed, a reminder of both her victory and the path still ahead. With her friends by her side, Elowyn knew that whatever came next, she would face it with the strength of the chain that bound her to the light and to them.